Investigators still don't have a motive for the mass shooting in Virginia Beach.
The shooter, who worked in the building where he opened fire, used 2 handguns he had bought legally. He was a government employee who had submitted a resignation letter just hours before the shooting. CBS News correspondent Errol Barnett has the latest on the investigation.
We now know that at least one of the deceased victims was in the suspect's chain of command, but was not his direct supervisor. Now, that could be key as investigators continue to explore if the gunman's job status had anything to do with what took place in Building 2 right behind me.
He was not terminated, and he was not in the process of being terminated.
Officials have not said what the suspect's resignation contained, only that his job performance was satisfactory.
He was in good standing within his department.
Reports of gunfire first came in at 4:08 p.m. Friday.
Shot fired, second floor. He's going up the steps.
2 minutes later, officers arrived from police headquarters nearby.
I got a nail down on the third floor with a gunshot wound, still looking for the gunman.
Navigating a building police described as a honeycomb, police eventually found the suspect 8 minutes later, who discharged rounds well into the double digits in a prolonged gun battle.
Officer hit.
At 4:19, one officer was shot, saved by his bulletproof vest. Once cornered, the gunman exchanged fire with police through a door. Then, silence. Officers entered and administered first aid, but the suspect died later at the hospital. Police recovered 2 .45 caliber handguns, one equipped with extended magazines and a silencer. More weapons were found at the shooter's home, all legally obtained. Have the suspect's family and relatives been in communication with you guys?
Our team of detectives are out interviewing everyone.
The suspect's family did not return our request for comment and posted this message on their front door. The Cradocks say they are grieving for their loved ones, sending condolences to victims. Sunday morning, each of the 12 victims could be seen in the Craddock driveway, staring back on the front page of the newspaper. Now, as we mentioned, all of the suspect's weapons were obtained legally, including the silencer, or what's known as a suppressor. And President Trump last night was asked directly if he thought those items should be restricted. And while he didn't answer that question directly, he did say, quote, "I don't like them at all." Don and Vlad?
Errol, thank you very much. Joining us now is David Chipman. He's the senior policy advisor at Giffords and a retired agent with the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. David, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So the gunman used what some call a silencer during his attack. That has sparked debate about whether such devices should be banned. I was surprised to learn that they are legal in many states. Explain what a silencer is, and if you think that a silencer is something that perhaps should not be made available to the public.
Well, first, silencers have been known to be absolutely lethal weaponry. They were first regulated in the United States in the 1930s and are treated identically to machine guns. Silencers are used to offensively shoot and kill the enemy and to confuse them. That's why SEAL Team 6 would have deployed silencers when they had to shoot guards before going and trying to capture bin Laden. Recently, what's interesting, the president says that he doesn't like silencers, but he and his son, for the first year of his presidency, used their political muscle to try to deregulate silencers and make them easier to acquire.
Is there any sporting purpose to a silencer? Does it make the weapon more accurate? Does it not scare off the deer? I mean, why would someone need one of these?
Yeah, I think it could be said that a silencer, if used on a long gun like a rifle, there's some applications that could keep it, the firearm, more accurate, and there's some applications that it could dampen the volume of the firearm somewhat. Previously, Republicans in Congress, under the Hearing Protection Act, were trying to sell the American public the fiction that silencers could be used in lieu of hearing protection, which every cop like myself knows is absolutely untrue. So I think where this stands is that that people in gun violence prevention, led by law enforcement, had been warning this administration that silencers are particularly deadly because they cause confusion in shootings and make it hard to recognize gunfire. And we warned that if used, they would be deadly. That came true on Friday.
That was my question, David. As a former agent with the ATF, former law enforcement officer, just describe that confusion, not only for first responders and officers who are approaching a mass shooting event, and for the people that are under fire. If you don't know or can't hear where the gunfire is coming from, and Jerika Duncan's reporting, we learned that there was one hero who was able to move people into a room and keep them safe. He ultimately lost his life as he went to look for other people, but he wouldn't have been able to hear, my guess is, where the fire was coming from if this shooter was using a silencer.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that when you're trying to survive a deadly encounter, we know seconds count, and the use of a silencer can cost you minutes. And the reality is that typical gunfire has a very unique sound, and it sounds different than any other sound. The Virginia pilot has done some interviews with people on scene who described the shooting sounding to them like a nail gun. And so it's human nature that someone will think of something innocent to explain a sound, and that will cost you minutes. All of the training that we have now is to empower people to respond immediately. The silencer tricks people into delaying that response, and that's why this individual was able to kill a dozen people.
Before we let you go, David, can I just ask you what the arguments made by those who want silencers legalized and who have pushed for the legislation to make them legal? What is the argument that they provide?
Well, what they argue is that the government has no role in regulating firearms, that it's an inherent constitutional and God-given right to acquire anything they want. I think gun owners like myself understand that particular weapons are particularly lethal, and we have to balance these rights with responsibilities. And one of the primary rights as of American is to be able to go to work on Friday and not be threatened by gunfire or death. And so I think we have to have a conversation that is honest about the particular lethality of weapons. And right now, people who want to deregulate silencers just aren't being honest.
And they also could potentially put law enforcement officers at risk in those situations as well. So, David, thank you so much. That's all we can have time for right now, but thank you for your insights.
Thanks for having me.